Welcome, fellow freaks, geeks, and nostalgic peeps, to my channel, Slime and Slashers, where, we talk about everything from Nickelodeon slime to horror movie slashers, but plenty of stuff in between, including books. And you guys may have guessed it, it's another bookish themed video. This isn't just any ordinary book themed video though. This video I'm super excited about because I'm going to be telling you guys what my top 10 favorite reads of this year is so far. And I have 13 honorable mentions, so it's kind of like a top 23 list, but we're just going to call it a top 10 plus 13 honorable mentions, and we're going to roll with it, okay? So stay right where you are, and I'll be right back after the short intro, and we will count down my top 10 favorite reads of 2023. Alright guys, since we're in the month of June, as of the time I'm recording this, I did think it would be an appropriate time to take a little gander at my reading spreadsheet and look at the books I've read thus far this year and which books are my favorite of the entire year. So this list is my top 10, as I said in the intro, but it is not a top 10 of 2023 releases. It's a top 10 of books that I've read this year. So these books have a range of publishing years. They were not all recently released. This is my top 10 books that I just happen to have read this year. Are there new releases in this stack of books? Perhaps. Are there some super old books in this stack? Maybe. I guess we'll just have to see. And it begins right now. So let's start off with the first book I'm going to talk about, and this is in no particular order. I'm not doing a 10, 9, 8. I'm not doing a specific number. I just have a nice neat stack that is stacked in size order. So we're going to go from the top of the stack to the bottom of the stack, and that's how we're going to do this. So you can see the top books are smaller. They're paperbacks. They're probably older. And the bottom book, it's a hardcover. It's bigger. So that's what we're going to do. And there's some in between that I just don't own. So we will go through a little at a time. The first book I want to talk about that has made my top 10 reads of the year is Stitch by Mark Morris. And I freaking love Mark Morris. This is only the second book I've read by him, but I'm blown away by his writing style. I just think that I really jive with it really well. I read this back in January as a buddy read with my friend Alex. Check out her channel. She's over at the Bookubus. I will link her below. If you really want to know more about vintage horror and hear about great vintage horror reads, I highly, highly suggest you check out Alex's channel. Again, the Bookubus. And we had such a blast reading this together. Last year, we also did a buddy read of a different Mark Morris book that also made my top 10 of the entire year, not just the halfway part of the year. That was Toady by Mark Morris. Freaking love Toady. Great coming of age book. This book, you're following some kids at college. I say kids, and they're younger than me, but they're college age, so they're not necessarily kids. But anyway, they're in college. There is this charismatic guy who kind of ropes some of them in, and the other friends try to investigate why everyone's so attracted to this guy and his message, and basically it all boils down to this one guy named Stitch who seems to be infecting people and doing something to the college campus. Things are super weird, and there's a lot going on in this. There's a lot of characters. There's also just a lot of action and a lot of weird shit in the best way. So I can't really summarize it in an eloquent way because there's just so much to describe when it comes to what this is actually about. Just trust me when I say it's eerie, it's unique. The horror imagery, just like with Toady, is out of this world for Stitch. And I just think that if you like horror, this is a great vintage horror, not only a vintage horror read, but like a vintage horror hidden gem, because not a lot of people I've ever heard talk about this. In fact, me and Alex are the only people I know that have ever even read this. So I think you should check out Mark Morris's work in general, but if you're looking for a place to start, I think you can't go wrong with either Toady, which made my top 10 of all of 2022, or Stitch, which has now landed on my top 10 of 2023 so far. Again, we're only midway through the year, but I have a feeling this could wind up in my top 10 of the entire year. So we will see, because we've got to go through another 6 months before we get there. But yeah, halfway point, freaking love this. Next up, a book I do not own a physical copy of, but it is like the perfect book if you're looking for something zany and unique, and this is Nelfs. And Nelfs is so much fun. Nelfs was written by Sydney Williams, and I just think if you're looking for an entertaining time, I feel like anybody, even people who aren't super into vintage horror, could pick this up and like it because it's just so unpredictable, so zany, so out there, so wild. And I just love how it's a very, very unique premise, but also the ending is super unique too. I recommended this book to two friends, my friend Amy over from Amy Noel Reads, and my friend Katrina from the channel Katrina Brown. And not to brag on my suggestions, but hey, bitch, they both gave it 5 stars, so maybe you should take my suggestion and check it out if you like campy stories, if you are okay with having fun, letting go, not being too serious with your reads, if you want a read that is just different from anything else you've ever read and you can kind of laugh at a bit, I would say check out Nelfs. There are these small creatures that remind me of Smurfs. They are TV characters, and this little girl, her name is Heaven. She lives with her mother. Her mother is raising Heaven as a single mother, so it's just her and her mom. They're really trying to navigate life as just the two of them, and Heaven starts to have these crazy nightmares, and she used to love the show Nelfs and the little Nelf characters, but in her nightmares, the Nelf characters are coming and almost kind of torturing her in her dreams. And they're also bashing Heaven's mom in her dreams and telling Heaven, your mom's a whore! And it's great, honestly. There's way more going on than just that. There's also this very interesting character named Danube who comes in and he knows about, like, supernatural stuff, and his freaking backstory is so interesting once you get into the novel a little bit more. Anyway, I don't want to give too much away because half of the fun is learning what the hell is going on. I do say that it doesn't capture you right away, so give it a little while. And there is an audiobook for this, which is rare for vintage horror. So yes, this is available on Kindle and on audiobook. The audio was so much fun because it's like a grown man and he's voicing the little girl Heaven, he's voicing the mom, but he's also voicing Danube, which I loved the voice he used for Danube. It was very like, I'm here to help. I can't even do it, but it was fun. And the Nelf characters, that narration is also hilarious. Like I said, your mom's a whore! But it was more serious than that and menacing sounding, but it was just bonkers the way everything unfolded, and I really just don't want to spoil it. I say if you are intrigued, take a chance and pick it up, because to me, this is a vintage horror book that is kind of like a gem, and it's a good stepping stone into the world of vintage horror, as long as you're not expecting something too overly serious, let's say. But I had a great time. My friends who I recommended it to had a great time. So I don't know, you might too. Another vintage paperback lands on my list of top 10 reads of 2023 so far, and that is Familiar Spirit by Lisa Tuttle. I just had such a great time with this book. This is technically a paperback from hell. You could see the little tag. This is the new edition. I wish I owned a vintage copy, but alas, I do not. It is what it is, but I am happy to own this. In fact, I read it on Kindle, but I liked it so much, I was like, I kind of want a copy because I have a feeling this will be one of my favorite reads, so I bought a physical copy just to have, since I don't have a vintage one. And yeah, so if you're interested, you can find it on Kindle, you can find it in this new edition, and so there's ways to read it. There is no audiobook. However, the reason I know I liked it so much is because I didn't even struggle reading this physically. I didn't have a problem that it didn't have audio. I was like, okay, the story enraptured me, the story totally engrossed me. We're following this woman, she just went through a bad breakup, she moves into this house, there's something amiss at this house, it's either haunted or there's some kind of spirit there, and things go to hell. She's not having a good time living at the house. There are some scenes with a cat where a cat does get hurt, so I do warn you if you're sensitive about that, but it isn't too prominent. Like, it just happens once, maybe twice, and then, you know, they go past it. And I do think that this is a wild time. There is some ridiculous stuff in here that if you take your books completely serious, you might not like it, but I don't know. There's just so many times in this book that I either laughed out loud or scoffed or was taken aback, and I was like, oh. So I really had a good time, and at first I was teetering between a 4.5 and a 5, but I ended up giving it a 5 just because I had a ball the entire time I was reading this, and it did not feel like a chore. This was a buddy read between my friends Andrew and Katrina, so Andrew is over at the channel It Came From The Page, check out his channel, and Katrina, to mention her again, she's at the channel Katrina Brown, and we all loved it. So it was unanimous. We all had a great time, and all gave this a really high rating, so you might might also like it. Here we go, another one of my top 10 reads of this year. We have This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. This book was a surprise to me. I did not think I was going to love it as much as I did. I did hear that this had cosmic elements in it, and I was surprised to discover that I think I'm a fan of cosmic horror because I freaking love this. But not only did it have cosmic elements, but it also had possession type of elements, specifically not your traditional type of possession, but a haunted object type of situation. And I really liked that element and that aspect of this book, as well as the cosmic stuff too. So all of that combined led for a very compelling read. This was also emotional. It examined grief of the main character. So I love grief horror. I freaking love possession or haunted object type of horror. And also it apparently seems that I like cosmic horror. So all of that together made this super, super, super enjoyable for me. And I knew right after I had read it that it was going to wind up as one of my favorite reads so far this year. So no question it had to be on this midway check-in top 10 list. As I said, I really, really, really like possession horror. So This Thing Between Us, it had like an element or two of possession in it, but Come Closer by Sarah Gran, which is also on my top 10 reads of this year so far, this is a pure possession story. So we're talking about 100% possession. I loved this book. It was beautifully written. It was a different kind of possession story in that I feel like the main character was very unique. Also, it kind of examined her relationship and how she was struggling with her relationship, and even outside of the possession, it seemed like her life was kind of falling apart even before she started to discover that something wasn't right with her, and she comes to believe that she is indeed possessed. And the ending to this is just so stellar, and it knocked me back. I don't know, I am partial to possession stories, so I don't think it would hit as hard and as good for everyone else as it did for me, but I feel like this is pretty well liked, and people usually talk about this in a very positive light, regardless of if they like possession stories or not. So I don't think it's just because of my bias that I like this so much. I think that this is truly a great book. So I'm happy to put it on my top 10 reads of the year so far. I think it deserves to be here, and I had such a fun time reading it. Very powerful read. Next in the pile of my favorite reads of the year, I've got A Head Full of Ghosts, another possession type of story, or is it? So essentially we're following this family, and the family believes that one of their daughters is possessed. And so they invite a documentary, like reality show, TV crew to come and document this supposed possession and maybe help their daughter. They don't know what else to do. They let these filmmakers into their house, but it seems to create more tension, and things devolve from there. There's a lot of family dynamics going on in here. We get the points of view from the little sister. We get to see experiences through her eyes, which I think is really, really unique. This blew me away. I read 2 books by Paul Tremblay this year, and I feel like this one was definitely my favorite out of the 2. Now, some people don't like the ending to this one, but I freaking adored it. I loved it. I know not everyone likes this. I think I remember my friend Elizabeth, check out her channel, Elizabeth Sagewood. I think she doesn't like this. I, however, did really like it, and so I'm so glad I finally got to it because it just checked all the boxes for me personally. And it was a very interesting story with really well-written characters. Next up, a newer book that not many people have talked about, except for the people who have read this for my friend Amy's book club, and that includes me. I probably would not have even heard of this or picked this up if it weren't for Amy. Again, she's over at the channel Amy Noel Reads, so please check her out. Her book club choices have been freaking legit amazing lately. I have enjoyed almost every single one of her book club reads this year, so she's doing a great job at picking out some amazing reads, including this one, which was her book club read for the month of April. This takes place in the 90s. We're following some characters. They all used to know each other in school, and now they're in later points in their life, and they all seem to be experiencing very strange, very weird things. And so they have to come back together and figure out what the hell's going on. And there is a mystery at the core. There is some intrigue. There is some strange elements that are really unexplained, so I don't think you'll get every single one of your answers in this. This does follow multiple points of views, but that did not bother me. There is a detective point of view, but that did not bother me either because it wasn't overwhelming, the story. It wasn't like it was a super huge chunk of the book or anything. Let me just read you a little bit of the back of the book.
It's the mid-90s. Grunge and flannel are fading as the Spice Girls and Hot Topic conquer the malls. Cherry gloss glistens on the lips of the youth. Modems hiss as American comes online, and in a fog-drenched cove at the edge of New England, something terrible awakens when a fisherman reels in a gruesome catch, the remains of a young woman, remains still pulsing with furious life. For Megan Monroe and her friends, this is how their nightmare begins. A wet whisper over their shoulder, a dark hand reaching out from the edge of their sight, and a name clawing at the back of their minds. A young woman scratched from their memory. To stop this devouring terror, Megan will need to mend broken friendships and reassemble her fractured past, for what stalks them hungers to remake itself in their image. Peace by bloody peace.
This was just so unique. The horror imagery was fantastic, and it was a very intriguing story. Anyway, I really have to be vague because I think the best thing is to just go into this and see what you think about it and give it a chance. A book I very recently read, Mayfly, and I just was blown away by this. I know some of my friends have read this and gave it more of like a 4.5. I gave it a straight up 5 because I just had such a good time being in the messed up head of Maeve, who is our main character. We're literally in her mind the entire time. There is some action, there is some violence throughout the entire book, but it really ramps up within the last 20% of the book. This is a psychological horror, but it also has some actual slashing elements in it. So we're following Maeve, and she is kind of like a wolf hidden in sheep's clothing. She has to try to blend in, and she's living in LA, and she just loves her surroundings, and she also works as a Disney princess. We don't ever hear the word Disney in this book, but it's very clear that is who she is. That's where she works, is Disney, and I just really liked the little tidbits about that. She's obsessed with Halloween. I loved that. I felt like this was very reminiscent to the film American Psycho. I have not read the book, but my friend Amy has read the book, and she said it is also very similar to the novel, but that Maeve is a more interesting and a more likable character versus Patrick Bateman. She thinks that Maeve was way more interesting and way more enjoyable to be in her head. Even though she is messed up, don't get me wrong, but she's the kind of messed up that you're like, I want to learn more, I'm fascinated. She is so multifaceted that I just cannot stop reading. And there's some amazing, lovely quotes in here. I read this on Kindle. I actually got an advanced reading copy and an advanced listening copy. I liked it so much that I bought my own copy because I just think I'm going to revisit this, and I'd love to revisit it maybe in like a year and highlight and mark in this book because so good, so good. It will stick with me for a while, and I think Maeve is one of my favorite like messed up characters that I've read so far this year. So yeah, and maybe for all of time, because I just think she's a very unique character. And even though people compare her to Patrick Bateman, so you might be asking, why is she unique if she can be compared to him? She's different than him, and like her love of Halloween, I think, takes her to another level and makes her like a little bit different and unique. And some of the kills in the end of the book are crazy, especially one where you might guess the cover comes into play a little bit. It's crazy. Just trust me, this is such a good book. I had a good time. I don't think everyone would love it as much as me, but it just was my kind of weird, I think. Another book I recently read, Hex. And Hex was a big surprise for me. I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. I had this book on my radar for a while, but what pushed me to pick it up, not to mention Amy again, but the wonderful Amy over from Amy Noel Reads, she suggested this book for me to read this year. I did the little project where it's like 12 friends recommend 12 books, and Hex was one of them, and it blew me away. It has elements of grief horror, it has witchy elements, it has small town creepiness elements. It just had a lot going for it. It was wonderfully written and very atmospheric, and the ending, just another level. It was dark, it was fantastic, and it was twisted. The characters were very, very interesting as well. So all around, really wonderful, well-rounded novel. Glad I finally gave it a chance. Thank you, Amy. And last but not least, another new release book, Sundial by Catriona Ward. I don't usually read a lot of newer books, but this year I've been expanding my horizons, and I have been reading some newer horror, including Sundial. And I did love her other book that I read, but I think I liked Sundial even more than that book. I feel like this was such an interesting story, and it surprised me where it went. So let me just read you the inside flap, because I don't want to give anything away that isn't said in the description.
You can't escape what's in your blood. All Rob wanted was a normal life. She almost got it, too. A husband, 2 kids, a nice house in the suburbs, but Rob fears for her oldest daughter, Kaylee, who collects tiny bones and whispers to imaginary friends. Rob sees a darkness in Kaylee, one that reminds her too much of the family she left behind. She decides to take Kaylee back to her childhood home to Sundial, deep in the Mojave Desert, and there she will have to make a terrible choice. Callie is worried about her mother. Rob has begun to look at her strangely and speaks of past secrets. Kaylee fears that only one of them will leave Sundial alive. The mother and daughter embark on a dark desert journey to the past in the hopes of redeeming their future.
So I just really adored this book. It blew me away, honestly. I read it in, I think, one sitting, and maybe 2 sittings at most, but I knew this was going to be a 5-star, like 10% in, maybe even less. I just knew right away. I could tell the feel of it, the style of it. I liked the storytelling aspects of it. I will say there is some animal cruelty in this, so if that bothers you, be warned, there is a reason it's there. It's not there just to be over the top. It's not there just cause. It's not there just to shock you. It's there for a purpose. It serves a role in the story. So, that was the last book. I believe that was the 10th one. So let's go through my honorable mentions very quickly. All right, 13 honorable mentions because 13 is my lucky number. You guys know I love the number 13. I was born on Friday the 13th, so I'm just going to go with it. We're going to do 13 honorable mentions. I've had a great reading year, as you may have guessed from me doing this list of 10 plus 13, aka 23 great reads from this year. I have almost read 100 books this year, which is unheard of for me in terms of the amount of books read in this short amount of time. So I'm very pleased with my progress, and I think it's a testament to how much I know my own style and my own reading taste that I'm having so many great reads. So that's awesome. All right, so first, a YA book, Frozen Charlotte. I thought this one was super dark, super twisted for a YA novel. It had great horror imagery. I read it for Amy McCaw's book club. Check out Amy's channel. She's fantastic. She's also an author of Mina and the Undead, as well as Mina and the Slayers. Next up, I really enjoyed The Wolf's Hour by Robert McCammon. I'm not going to go through these books in super extreme detail because I have talked about a lot of them either in vlogs or in monthly wrap-ups, and in some cases in both types of videos. But The Wolf's Hour, Robert McCammon's my favorite author. It blew me away. It followed our main character, who's not your typical type of werewolf, and it had a lot of action. The action scenes were actually done well, which is difficult to do in book form, but more importantly, it had a wonderful main character who had a very interesting past, and that was explored in depth, and that was one of my favorite parts of the book. It also took a very poignant look at World War II and the horrors of concentration camps. We actually had a couple of scenes at a concentration camp, and it dealt with that topic with a lot of grace and with respectability. I don't think it was cheaply trying to use that as something horrific. I think it was a very sad part of the book, and I feel like it was a great way to explore how sad the actual terrible idea that this took place in our history is. So I don't think McCammon was trying to play up on it just for shock value. I think it was there for a reason, and I think he utilized the discussion of it in a very powerful, meaningful way. Next up, another book that features some elements of cosmic horror in the actual story, The Nothing That Is. I read this on a whim. I heard about it off of a friend's booktube channel, decided to check it out. It's on Kindle Unlimited, and I freaking loved it. It was batshit. It was wild. We had dinosaur bones. We had freaking phones ringing that weren't even plugged in, motorcycle gangs. It just had a whole bunch of crazy elements in one, but it all worked together. It was very interesting, and it doesn't answer everything. That's not uncommon with cosmic horror. That didn't bother me. I thought the story was really intricate, really interesting and fascinating, and it was a wild time. Definitely recommend if you like cosmic horror. Next up, another vintage book, The Cipher by Kathy Koja. Of course, this is my beat up copy, but this is hard to find, so I'm glad to even own this. There you go, there's the inside cover. Kind of creepy face. This, basically, you've got these people who live in an apartment and they discover like a black hole. It's not really like a traditional black hole. It's just like this hole that leads into nothingness, and they start sticking things in it and start to experiment with it, and it's pretty creepy. It's pretty weird. this is a strange novel. The writing style is also a little different, but I personally loved it. I don't think it would be for everybody, but if you like weird fiction, I feel like this could be up your alley. Next up, another vintage book, Swan Song by Robert McCammon. So 2 Robert McCammon books on my honorable mentions list. I know not everyone liked this book. Cough, cough, Andrew from It Came From the Page. He did not like this at all. So this, it gets a lot of varied ratings. A lot of people say it's way too similar to Stephen King's The Stand. I did see the similarities, but I think this is a much more entertaining book. I feel like I enjoyed the characters, but more so, this book flew by for being as long as it is. Look at this chunker. It did not feel as long as it truly is, and that's a testament to, I think, how well written it is. People will argue The Stand has more fleshed out characters, but I feel like The Stand really lacks in the story tying together, and some elements of the story really being super fulfilling, like the end of the book specifically, like, or right before you get to the end of the book. This, I feel like I never felt like it dragged. I really enjoyed seeing what was going on with the different factions of people who survived this nuclear disaster that hits Earth. And specifically, we're following characters who are all in America. And we're following some bad characters, and we're following some good characters. There's even a wrestler character in here who I freaking loved. And also, I really liked, my favorite character was a character named Sister, and she was awesome. Now, there are some things that I feel like could have been done a little bit better. This was not a perfect read for me. I gave it a 5, but I think, looking back, it's more of a 4.5, but I still think that this is a wonderful, epic book, especially if you like post-apocalyptic stories. And I think it's one of those books you just gotta read and see what you think about it for yourself. Next up, another book I do not own physically, but I enjoyed it so much, I was able to get a copy and read it from my library. We Spread by Ian Reid. I thought this was such a powerful book. It was also kind of strange in that you didn't exactly know what was going on at some points. I wouldn't call it pure horror, but I wanted to put it on this honorable mentions list because I thought it was such a fantastic, deep, touching read about, you know, what it's like to grow older, how you can't really trust your mind, but even more than that, it just had so many interesting layers to it that I'm still thinking about. Another vintage book, this makes my list because it was bonkers, it was insane, it was batshit. We've got a girl who is a country singer, and she winds up having to save the world. Will she be able to? That's the big question. And I think it's so crazy how people were like having sing-offs, almost like there were sword fights in this novel. I can't really explain it, but it's fantastic. There was a lot of weird supernatural elements and occult elements in this, but there was a ton of action, and it was just a hilarious book. If you like zany books, I feel like this would be right up your alley. Fast-paced, weird, you're looking for something that is unique, this would totally fit the bill. I had such a good time. I can't wait to read more by Douglas Borton. I did read a book that he wrote called Cain. He wrote that under the name Michael Prescott, and that was interesting and good and brutal at points. It's more about it like a slasher who comes into a town and tries to kill everybody in the town. It's a very, very small town. That was written in a more normal style, because it took a little while for the action to get started. This crazy, hardcore, brutal action gets started on like page 5. A kid slash baby gets hurt, so beware if you're not into that. If you can't handle stuff like that, I understand. But this had so much action and so much ridiculousness that only vintage horror can really provide. And I totally recommend it if you're looking for fun vintage horror reads. A fun, newer read is Night of the Living Trekkies. I read this for my friend Kat over at the channel Kat's Novel Adventures. Her Zombie-thon readathon. This was her group read, her official group read for that readathon. And I actually discussed this with her on the channel with spoilers. And the author joined us like in the chat, not like on camera, but he joined us in the chat and was telling us really fun tidbits about the writing of the story and where some of the ideas of the story came from. So it was awesome to have the author there interacting with us, you know, through his keyboard. Fantastic. Such a great experience. This is so much fun. You don't even have to like Star Trek to enjoy this, but if you do like Star Trek, I think you'd get even more enjoyment out of it because of all the references. The funny thing is, not only does it reference Star Trek, it also references Star Wars, and I think that's really fun that it references those two big freaking franchises, so that was also an extra bonus because I like both, but I like Star Trek TNG specifically the best. There was mentions of all different types of Treks in here, not just Star Trek TNG. They mentioned the original series, they mentioned Voyager, they really mentioned every Trek, and we've got a zombie attack, and they're not your typical zombies. I like how this author did something different with the zombie lore here, like where the zombies came from, and how they affect the humans. I like it. I like it a lot. The setting was great, lots of action, lots of heart. So it not only had humor, but it had heart. So this really has everything. So if you want something that has humor, but isn't too over the top, like Death Song's a little over the top. You can't really take this seriously. Like when you're going into Death Song, you're like, eh. You can take this story seriously. Even though it is far-fetched, even though it is a little absurd, it still has heart. It still has a fantastic story at the core of it. You're still really invested in the characters. Another vintage book has made my honorable mentions list, Worms by James R. Montague. This was so much fun. I had a blast with this. So at first, I didn't know if I was gonna like this. At first, this guy and his mean-ass wife, they're going on vacation, and they end up in this small town. The dude falls in love with this abandoned property, and he wants to buy it. He tries to figure out a way he can convince his wife to let him buy this, but his wife is so freaking mean. She hates him. But he starts to think of her pretty badly too. He's like, man, my wife, whatever. So you gotta get through the whole husband and wife bullshit in the first 10 or 15%. Once you get past that, there's some great worm stuff in this freaking book. Like some of the best worm shit, that sounds weird. Some of the best worm shit that I've ever seen in terms of worm imagery, like animal attack imagery, but also like a psychological element. So it's not just where you physically see worms, you're also in the main narrator's head, the main character's head, and you're wondering, like, is he really seeing these worms? What is going on? So there's like a whole nother like mental element to it. Then there's like an actual like whoa element to it, like worms are coming for you. Anyway, loved, thought it was fun. It's not that long. The text is small in this newer edition, but it actually does have a audiobook for this, which is again rare for vintage horror. Not all vintage horror books have an audiobook. This one does. I say if you like Animal Attack, pick it up. This one has a little bit more depth because there's like a psychological element to it too, instead of just being, oh, these animals are coming to get me. It's a little bit more than that, and that's what I think makes it a little bit different from other books that could be put in the same category technically. Next up, a wonderful short novella. This is Blanky by Keelan Patrick Burke. I freaking love this book. It really explores some heavy topics, including grief. So grief horror I seem to really enjoy, and this definitely examines a father's grief after he loses his little baby, and he comes across the baby's old blanket, which he thought he had lost. And more develops after he finds this blanket, and it's not all good. The blanket isn't. Is it a cozy, nice blanket? I don't think so. Anyway, it's so short, I don't want to spoil it. Check it out. Especially if you like grief horror, I think you'd really, really love this. And there's more to it than just the grief. There's actual horror in it once you get closer to the end. So this was weird. Great characters, great examination of parents struggling to get over the death of their child. And it was powerful overall. Also, very great horror imagery overall, too. Another short book. This is definitely a lot different in tone than Blanky, because this does not deal with grief. This is Werecage, and the cover sucks, but don't judge a book by its cover in this case, because the story is so much fun. It is a little zany, it is hard to take seriously, but it is explained why what is happening at the end of the book, and to me it made sense. To me, I bought it. To me, I thought this was overall a very well-rounded story. So we are following this character. He loves Nicolas Cage. He's coming back out of this theater from like an all-night Nicolas Cage movie marathon, and he gets bitten by someone who looks like Nicolas Cage, and he's like, what the hell? I just came from a Nicolas Cage premiere. This freaking person who looks like Nicolas Cage just bit me. So he goes home, and he wakes up, and he's turned into Nicolas Cage, and he's like, what the hell? And he starts talking in Nicolas Cage movie quotes, and it's wild. And he's like, how is anyone going to believe me about what's going on with me and my body? Like, what is going on? How am I going to solve this problem? Why is this happening to me? This is so weird. And it's fantastic. There is a dog cage in this, like a little dog, but it's Nicolas Cage. There's all kinds of different cages in this. It's so good. It's so good. It's so weird. I read this for the week of Weird, and that was, of course, hosted by my friend Crystal over at the channel Fiber Artsy. Check out her channel. She is fantastic. And it was also hosted by Jason from Jason's Weird Reads. And I'm so glad they had that mini readathon because it gave me an excuse to pick up a really random, really weird Nicolas Cage themed book. If you like Nicolas Cage, I think you can't go wrong with this book if you enjoy books with some humor. So this definitely had humor done in a great way, but it also had heart. You also liked the main character a lot, and the story was really, really well done in my opinion. For being so silly, it really paid off all in the end and came together. Last two honorable mentions, but not least, we've got two slashers that I just recently read this month. So we've got Slash by Hunter Shea, my very first Hunter Shea book that I've ever read. Fantastic. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I am going to be talking more about slashers in the upcoming months. I want to do like a very in-depth slasher recommendation video. Slash would definitely be on the slasher recommendation list because it is definitely a different kind of slasher. You have the examination of grief, you've got in-depth character development, which isn't always the case with a slasher book. It's very hard to pull off a slasher book when you compare it to slasher movies. Slasher movies, you could have characters you don't care about. You could have throwaway characters. Now, not everyone loved this book. My friend Ali from the channel Criminale gave this a 2-star. He did not like the characters. He did not think they were very compelling. I disagree. I thought they were very compelling. You spend a lot of the book, especially with the main character, who's mourning the loss of his wife. And he's also trying to figure out what happened to his wife when she was faced with surviving this ordeal where she came out as the final girl, like 5 years before she ended up dying. All of this is in the back of the book. It's not spoilers. Anyway, so there's a mystery at the heart of the story. It's not just about people trying to escape a slasher. There's a mystery going on. The freaking things behind the slasher, the story and the origins behind the slasher are also unique. So this had a lot of unique elements that I think makes it a grade above some other slasher books. Very much enjoyed. Can't wait to read more by Hunter Shea. And the other slasher on this honorable mentions list that will be talked about in a future slasher recommendation video is Escape from Happydale by Jack Quaid. Now this seems to be a book that people either love or hate. My friend Liz did not like this book. She gave it like a 2.5 or something. I gave it a 5. My friend Katrina from Katrina Brown gave it a 5. So not everyone agrees on this book, but I think it did have a lot of fun, unique elements, and it had slasher tropes done well, but also had a little twist to the tropes. It wasn't all standard generic tropes that have been repeated and repeated and repeated, which you do end up coming across when you read a lot of slasher books and after you've watched a lot of slasher movies. After a while you're like, okay, been there, done that. This is one of those cases where it had something different. I just love how you have this badass main female character, Parker, who doesn't take shit from anybody. She's small and petite. You wouldn't think she could stand up and go face a slasher. Not only does she do that, she goes out looking for slashers. She's just not like, you know, happens to be at the wrong place at the wrong time and steps up and happens to survive. She goes out and tries to find these slashers and saves other people. And she also uses a fun weapon. She uses a chainsaw that she names Aerosmith. And again, she's trained to beat slashers from a woman who was also trained by generations of her family who have defeated slashers before. So I love that. I love that there's an element of there are these women who know how to defeat slashers, and that knowledge has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. I think that makes this so different, so unique, and that the final girl isn't just somebody who decides to, you know, go on with their life after surviving an attack. They want to get revenge, and they want to defeat slashers, and they want to protect other people from slashers. Okay, that was my list of top 10 favorite reads from 2023. So far, again, we're only in June. This list could completely change when I go to do my top 10 of 2023. I can't wait to see what books end up still on the list when it's all said and done, and what books are added to the list, what books are taken off of the list. We will see how it morphs and changes and what stays the same. I can't wait. It's going to be so much fun. I do expect to do the mid-year book freakout tag. That will be coming in about a month or so, but I wanted to do this top books list first. Thanks for letting me do the 13 honorable mentions. You know I can't just freaking cut things down to just 10 things. No. I can't just do a top 10. I have to add all kinds of extras and bonuses. That's just me. That's who I am. I want to thank you guys for spending your time with me. You guys know how much I appreciate your time and that you choose to spend it watching my videos. It really, truly means the world to me. And I had such a good time discussing with you guys some of my favorite reads of the year. what are some of your favorite reads of the year this year? Let me know in the comments below. Do you like any of the books I talked about in this video? Are there some of your favorite books? Let me know. I'd love to know about that. But for this time, guys, that is it for me. Till next time, you guys know what you can do. Keep on killing it. Bye, guys.